Let's go on to number 2. Hey, look, it's Steve Darrow, who says, the left doesn't seem to understand the difference between physical capital, which is wealth, and human capital, which is a person's skills and talents that are valued in the market. Our philosophy seeks to build valuable human capital in the largest swath of the population possible. The progressive philosophy is fixated on spreading the physical capital as evenly as possible from each according to his ability. Are the progressives willfully ignorant of the distinction between these two types of capital? Well, they certainly understand what human capital is on some level, Steve, because all of their income comes from other people's hard work. So that's a start. You're asking a rational question of an irrational philosophy. You're asking people to see the value in a system whose value is so self-evident, and they're not interested in human capital. They're interested not in capital either in the way we understand it. What they're interested in is money. They're interested in other people's money. They do not have the effort. They're either the willpower or the brains, or mostly they're just not so much stupid as just lazy. And as we mentioned a couple times before, the or liberal, like the original liberal, uber liberal idea as a college professor, because college professor is very, very convinced he's just the smartest guy in the world, when in point of fact he's probably not in the top 10%, but he's probably 11 or 12. But he's upset about the fact that other people have more money than he does, and so people like that, and people all the way down the social strata, including all the way up the social strata, I might point out, but for different reasons, people feel like this is, these attacks on, I don't even like the word capitalism. If the word was invented by Karl Marx, and I believe it was, I don't want anything to do with it. Capitalism is certainly what we call our system, and I'm not attacking capitalism. I'm attacking the word, especially today. When that word was founded, when Marx was writing what he was writing, we were going through a tremendous trauma, as we are right now. We were going from an agricultural age to an industrial age. Now we're going from an industrial age to an information age. And so Marx basically was writing about a time where there was a tremendous amount of social upheaval and a tremendous amount of injustice, really. And so he used a bunch of terms that just don't have any meaning really anymore. And the reason I'm getting into this argument is because if you call this free market economy of ours capitalism, it's designed to give people the sense that you can't play unless you have capital. In other words, the word itself is designed to exclude most everybody. And when you really get down to thinking of capitalism, you think of Mr. Moneybags, whatever his name is, from Monopoly, right? Big fat guy with a vest and a huge stomach and a top hat holding 2 bags with dollar signs on him, right? That's what capitalism is. I have the capital I need to play the game. And when you think about the time that Marx was writing, you realize that, if you wanted to get started there, you wanted to start a factory that required actual capital. There were cases of people like Carnegie and many others working themselves out of complete poverty to becoming enormous capitalists. But the term is, as Eric says, it's meaningless. It has no meaning. You don't need capital in order to be a player in this capitalist free market system of ours. You need a little bit of money, but we're not even talking about financial strategies. For example, you can be part of a free market economy and create an enormous amount of wealth for everybody without investing a dime, and I ought to know, because I ought to know. You can create enormous amounts of productive labor and ideas and so on without having a big sack of money. So I don't really like the term that much, again, because it's kind of got this built-in prejudice against it. But basically, what you're saying is true. They don't. I think probably the best way to put this, Steve, is that the left assumes that we don't see any value in people. That's the assumption. That's what they used to sell the envy and the hatred to the class divisions. And I don't see that class divisions exist in this country. I'm not so naive to say that there are not people of different economic levels, needless to say. There are richer people and poor people. We say middle class, upper class, lower class, or whatever you want to call it. But they're not classes in the way that the term was understood, again, when Marx was writing. In those days, in the 1800s, if you were a member of the nobility or the upper class in Britain, it was pretty near the divine right of kings, right? I mean, the king could do anything, essentially. They had Parliament enforcing him. At that time, I'm reading an awful lot about Oliver Cromwell lately. But my point is, if you were in England in 1824 and you were waiting for something, and the Duke or the Earl came by and wanted to get in front of you in line, well, he's going to, by God, get in front of you in line, and you should know your place. Same was true in Russia and all of these societies. The idea that there is a class of people who are the nobility, and there's another class that is the gentry and the yeomanry or the peasants all the way down the line. These were immovable, fixed positions. You were pretty much born into them, and they were almost impossible to break out of. There are a few stories from those times when you would find people who worked their way from working class into middle class. Many did. All of them did, essentially, for all intents and purposes, by what we call poverty today. But many people worked themselves from being working people up to being gentlemen, and in some cases, upper class nobility. And the existing nobles had nothing but contempt for these people. Not a real proper. He's not a proper baron. He's a merchant. He's a trader. He's a guy who made who got his title through money and all the rest of it. So you had these aristocrats who didn't like the idea of money. Why do you need money if you're an aristocrat? You just order people around. You have political power over people. Your holdings, your vast estates generate revenue, and you have peasants living there, and they generate some revenue, but you don't pay for anything in the sense where you have to reach into your pocket. And one of the things that's most shocking to me about these end-stage nobles in the last days of real aristocracies was just how unbelievably consistently cheap they were. Dishonestly cheap, fraudulently cheap. It seems to be a running thread that these people with these vast amounts of money and these vast estates, would go to a tailor, let's say, and they'd order a new suit, and the tailor would basically spend every dime he's got in order to produce something spectacular for his lordship at an agreed upon price. His lordship gets the thing, the guy submits the bill, and then his lordship basically dicks this guy around for a year, 2 years, 7 years, 10 years, maybe never pays him at all. And just this utter contempt for the idea that, oh yes, well I owe them and I owe this and I owe that. Oh, it's just too bad. Just beastly commoners and their savage demand to be paid the money that I stole from them. So much of the terminology that we're using these days, or that the left is using these days, is not only 200 years old. It probably never really made a whole lot of sense in the first place. But that's why the words are there. And that's why controlling the language is the same thing as controlling the culture. And why we already lose a significant part of the battle before the battle even begins, just by agreeing to fight it on their battlefield of choice using their words. Capitalist, there's just scores of them. Socialism is kind of a nice word. Everybody likes to be social. Social would be social. Yeah, why not? They don't call it communalism. They don't call it regimentationism, they just socialism. So in any event, the direct answer to your question is they don't think that we see people as valuable. Their entire philosophy is convincing working people that the people they work for are bloodless, inhuman monsters who do nothing but suck all of the work and life out of them. They just do nothing but leech out of them. Because this is the final thing here, and this is the main thing. In order to gin up this kind of envy and hatred, and in order to gin up enough support for such a dreadful system, you have to do two things. You have to convince people that the rich people didn't earn the money they've got. And then secondly, and more importantly, you have to convince them that the reason they're rich is because they took money, not just from people, but they took money from you. In other words, that guy's rich off of your back. You see this a lot of times with unions, and people say, "Oh, we built this company." Well, it's true that you and the founder of the company built it together. You were compensated for that, and this wouldn't be here without him. It'd be here without you. It wouldn't be here without him. There'd be no Apple computer without Steve Jobs. There would be an Apple computer without the thousands of people who work in the Apple store. Those people are interchangeable, and they are working at a job that pays a certain rate, and that's it. And if you want to make more money, you can either become more scarce and rarer, have more skills that are in higher demand, or you can ditch the security of a regular job and join the exciting world of entrepreneurism, which I can tell you from experience is it's work, and it's and people who run a business know when I say it's stressful, it's the kind of stress I not only willingly take on, but I enjoy, but it is stressful. You have to worry about making payroll in a way that when you're an employee, you generally don't have to worry about that. We just got finished with a 3-year audit, which took enormous amounts of time and significant amount of money to basically go through the last 3 years of every single check that we ever wrote and every single transaction we ever made, and convinced the IRS that the deductions we claim were legitimate. And after a 3-year audit, they disallowed something like $1,000 over 3 years, which is a very good outcome for me, but it is an outcome that took full time. One of the reasons you see Bill leaving here, he's on vacation now, thank God, but one of the reasons you see Bill leaving here at 7 o'clock at night is because he has to go over every single document, every single transaction, everything we ever wrote, ever, and put them in order. And we went in there and we showed him we were telling the truth. And the outcome was good, but it was time consuming and energy consuming and expensive. So there you go. These are things that people who work at Apple, the Apple Store, don't have to worry about. And I know because I was an employee for almost all of my life. What is it? IAWS AWAC. It's got to be an acronym for something. But in any event, how's that 40-hour work week going? Yeah. That great line is so true about entrepreneurs. They're people who can't bear to work a 40-hour week, so they end up working an 80-hour week. Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, so moving on here.